Let's talk for a second about that initial testing that you conducted in connection with this case. When approximately did you begin your testing? And I'm going to phrase it as your initial testing, the testing that you testified to about last year. When did you start that initial testing?
From what I recall, it would have been late 2023 into early 2024.
I want to talk about the drinking glass first. Did you become aware that there was a drinking glass that was found at the scene?
Yes.
And what was the testing that you sought to determine as it relates to the drinking glass and the taillight?
So looking at the evidence, as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at that quarter panel taillight, we have an isolated region of damage. And looking at the additional evidence in terms of a broken drinking glass at the scene, we wanted to do testing to determine if a small object or projectile such as the drinking glass could induce damage that was consistent with that we saw on the subject Lexus.
Were you able to reach an opinion and or conclusion as it relates to whether or not there is a possibility that the drinking glass or a drinking glass could cause the type of damage that you saw on the Lexus?
Yes.
Given everything else in your investigation, are you concluding that the glass was responsible for the taillight damage?
No.
However, you did seek to determine whether it was possible, correct?
Okay. Sustained.
I'll ask it a different way, Your Honor. What testing did you do, did you undertake in furtherance of that specific, answering that specific question? Could the glass damage the taillight?
Right. So we designed a pressurized cannon that was capable of firing the drinking glass into the taillight at various speeds. We aimed for speeds of 30 and 40 miles an hour. Our achieved speeds were at 31 and 37 miles per hour. And we found that in the 37 mile an hour impact, and again, this is to emulate or simulate an individual throwing a drinking glass. The purpose of the cannon, if you will, was to be able to hone in on a speed precisely and obviously aim for that target. So it would just serve as a means of getting that projectile to the taillight in a means that we could measure it. And what we observed in the 37 mile an hour test is that we got damage that was generally consistent with that of the subject taillight, and that there was a large portion of the outer lens that was shattered and fractured, as well as the underlying clear plastic diffusers and chrome piece.
Tell me a little bit about the methodology that you undertook, the scientific methodology in building that pneumatic cannon and aiming that glass directly at the taillight.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, it was a customized cannon, if you will. It had a barrel that was capable of fitting a rocks or an old-fashioned drinking glass in it, and that's a glass that has a thinner sidewall, if you will. I think the glass was about 3 inches in height or so, maybe 3.5 inches, with the bottom portion being solid glass or just a thick piece of glass. So we were able to design a kind of a holder for it, if you will. Almost, you could really think of it as stuffing an actual cannon with a cannonball. So we literally would put the drinking glass in the cannon. There was a pressurized vessel behind that we would open up a valve rapidly, and when it was set to a certain pressure, that would determine the exit velocity that it would leave the barrel at. And we were able to aim that device into the taillight at those specified speeds to be able to determine what would the damage pattern be when we fired that glass.
Were you able, in this scientific experiment, to control for aim and trajectory?
Yes.
Were you able to control for velocity or exit speed of the glass?
Yes.
Were you able to control for damage patterns as it pertained to both the glass as well as the taillight at which it was aimed?
I don't know that we have had control over that. Ultimately, physics takes over after that interaction occurs. I can't influence how that material is going to perform or how the glass will break, per se.
It's a poor question on my part. Were you able to, or did you undertake to memorialize the damage pattern that you saw on the taillight and the glass as the glass was projected into the taillight?
Yes.
All right. Did you do that through photographs?
Yes.
High-speed video?
Yes.
And all of that was memorialized in your report?
Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm handing you two photographs, or two 8.5 by 11 documents that contain two photographs each. Can you take a look at those two documents and tell me if you recognize those?
Yes.
Does one represent, you mentioned that one of the tests that you performed was at 37 miles an hour, correct?
Correct.
Did you mention the speed at which, or the velocity at which the other test was done?
If I didn't, it was 31 miles per hour.
All right, so 31 and 37. Do you see those two documents in front of you?
Yes.
Does one of them represent the 31 mile an hour test and the photographs associated with that?
And an extracted frame from the high speed, yes.
Okay, and does the other one represent the other test, the 37 mile an hour test?
Yes.
If we could take those one at a time. May I approach one more time? Is this the photograph that was just marked as Exhibit 213 that's in front of you?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jurors what they're looking at?
So on the left part, you are looking at a frame from the high-speed video just after the contact with the taillight. On the right, you're looking at the post-damage to the taillight after the glass had been fired into it.
And if we could look at the next exhibit with the court's permission.
Okay.
And what are we looking at here?
Same thing on the left. Again, this is the 37 mile an hour test. The glass striking just in the area where the bottom of the turn signal indicator is, so right where it meets the red portion of the lens and the clear portion of the lens. That's about where the impact point was. You could see that a large portion of the outer red assembly, lens cover is missing and fractured. The clear portion of the part of the outer lens to the turn signal indicator is also fractured, as well as the underlying clear diffusers in that assembly.
Would your testing in both of these scenarios, the 31 mile an hour test and the 37 mile an hour test, represent an accepted methodology for controlling for aim, velocity, impact site, and those issues, if you will, as it relates to testing of this sort?
Yes, we were able to control those variables.
And is that an accepted methodology in the area or the field of accident reconstruction?
Absolutely, yes.
When you finished your testing, were you able to make a determination as to whether or not either one of these velocities, the 31 mile an hour velocity or the 37 mile an hour velocity, were consistent with the damage that you saw on the subject Lexus, which is the 2021 Lexus belonging to Ms. Reed?
Yes, from the 37 mile per hour test, we are getting damage that's generally consistent, and that I mentioned we have portions of the outer lens missing, the underlying diffuser. There was also some fracturing on the backside of the assembly. So again, we observed damage that was generally consistent with that of the subject taillight.
And that was the 31 or the 37?
The 37.
The 37. What about the 31?
Didn't have enough energy to create that damage.
So were you able to conclude, in your opinion, whether or not the velocity of that glass hitting the taillight would have to be somewhere in the vicinity of 37 miles an hour, well above 30 miles an hour?
Well above, and it certainly could have been above 40 miles per hour per se. I mean, we may have actually blown out more of the outer lens had the speed increased.
Did you have any information in the data or documents that you reviewed associated with this case, for instance, that John O'Keefe had a pneumatic cannon with him out there?
No.
Okay. So obviously, well, let me ask a different way. Based on this series of tests, were you concluding that the damage on the taillight conclusively was the product of a glass being hurled into the taillight?
Objection.
Sustained.
Were you concluding, or did you opine, that the damage to the taillight came from a drinking glass?
No, I gave an opinion that the damage was generally consistent with that in the test, compared to the subject taillight.
But only in the circumstance where the glass is being hurled at 37 miles an hour, correct?
Yes.
Sustained. Can I ask it differently?
Under
Mr.
what circumstance did you determine that it was consistent with a drinking glass?
If that drinking glass, again, the purpose of the test was to do a test to evaluate or simulating somebody throwing a drinking glass at the taillight. So that's what that test was to demonstrate.
Understood. Let's turn to another test that you undertook regarding the head injuries that you became aware of. Did you become aware of, in the data that you received, that Mr. O'Keefe had suffered head injuries to the back of his skull?
Yes.
What sort of testing did you do to determine whether or not and under what circumstances that head injury may be connected or associated with the damage to the taillight?
We performed a drop test with a hybrid 3, so that's an instrumented anthropomorphic test device to be able to measure the accelerations on a head form and observe the damage to an impact to the taillight.
What is an ATD, anthropomorphic test device?
So it's a device that's commonly used in our field, and it's certainly approved by the federal government to evaluate crash forces and occupant kinematics, or I should say occupant crash forces. So it's a device that reconstructionists and biomechanists typically use or commonly use to be able to evaluate, like I said, whether it's forces in a motor vehicle, or let's say you have something being dropped on somebody's head or an impact to somebody's body part, right? We can use that instrumented dummy to evaluate and measure the acceleration and the forces.
Another word or another phrase often used in association with ATD devices are crash test dummies, correct?
Correct, yes.
Why was it important to do a drop test?
So we wanted to have an understanding based upon the fact that Mr. John O'Keefe had a skull fracture to the back of his head, whether or not an impact, a direct impact between the taillight and the back of his head could have caused that skull fracture.
What did your testing indicate?
When we did the test, the impact to the taillight was at 15 miles per hour, and we observed that the damage to that taillight was significantly more than the subject taillight at the 15-mile-an-hour speed. Furthermore, it did not generate, according to my colleague, Dr. Rentschler, enough forces to cause a skull fracture.
So ultimately, what was your conclusion related to the taillight potentially striking John O'Keefe in the head at above 15 miles an hour?
From a damage perspective, it was inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
Correct, inconsistent.
Did you consider temperature and control for temperature in any of your testing?
Yes.
Why is that important?
Well, that will affect how that, we've talked a lot about that acrylic material of the lens. That will certainly affect how it fractures. So we absolutely controlled the temperature during these tests.
How did you control for temperature?
So we had them sit overnight in chest freezers to get them to the desired temperature, which for our original set of testing was at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. We then rapidly moved them to our test fixture, and then they were fired almost immediately after that.
And when you're talking about them, you're talking about exemplar taillights?
Correct, yes.
Are those exact replica taillights that you would find on the 2021 Lexus SUV?
Yes.
Okay.